Hey everybody, welcome back to Griffin Grills. Tonight we're going to be doing some pork chops with olive oil, salt, garlic, and pepper. Then we're going to also fry up some bacon in a cast iron skillet and do some mushrooms and provolone on top. So let's get started with our pork chops. We're just going to douse a little bit of olive oil on the meat just to help our seasoning stick. Nothing too over extreme, just a nice shimmer on the meat's what you're looking for. Then after we get that side, we'll just flip them all over, because we are going to be seasoning both sides. And if y'all have any recommendations for stuff you'd like to see cooked on the channel, just please drop it down in the comments, and I'll try to do my best. Alright, now that we got olive oil on both sides, we're just going to set this off to the side and use our wire rack with a paper towel underneath so our seasonings doesn't clump up everywhere. Alright, so seasoning tonight, we're going to keep it pretty basic. We're just going to do some salt, garlic, and a little cracked pepper. And while I'm seasoning the meat, I already got a chimney full of charcoal out there lit, ready to go. So by the time I finish up in here, it should be ready to dump into our grill. So now that we got both this side done, we're going to flip them over and hit that other side up. And having one of these wire racks makes it real nice when you come to season your meat. You can just apply the seasoning, let everything fall, hit a paper towel or a cutting board. Makes cleanup a little easier. Works great if you're pre-salting some steaks too. You can just throw them on there, put a little salt on there, and they don't have to sit in a container and get soggy on one side. Alright, now we're going to take them out and put them on the grill, so I'll meet you out there. Alright, so here we are back out at the grill, and we're just going to lay our chops on the direct heat side, get a good sear going on them. You want to shoot for an internal temperature of about 145 for chops. Because it is pork product, we want to get it at least done before we eat it. Now we are going to move them over to our indirect side with our bacon and our mushrooms and cheese. So they will cook a little bit more in the process there, but we're going to get them pretty close to done before we move them over. I'm gonna say somewhere around 130 to 135 before we move them to the indirect, and then lower our lid and let the heat melt the cheese. And we'll also saute some mushrooms in a cast iron skillet with some crumbled up bacon, and hopefully it's going to turn out great. Yeah, starting to get some nice sear marks on there. We're not really going to worry about trying to get cross hatch marks because it's going to be covered up when we put our cheese and bacon and mushrooms on. So as long as we get them cooked to at least 130, 135, move them over to the indirect side and let the heat finish off with the dome lid closed. Now notice how it looks like we got a little bit more done there. I thought it was a hot spot on the grill, but it was actually just a little globule of fat that was burning. So I just scraped that off, and we'll just let those finish cooking on. We might flip them 2 or 3 more times before we move them over. Like I said, really the only thing you want to do is make sure you have a good meat thermometer. Check the internal temperature of your meat. The last thing you want to do is put all this preparation into a cook and undercook some meat and get everybody sick. So I'm going to take care of these and get them to where we need them to be, and then I'll bring the cast iron out here, go ahead and fry up some bacon, and we're going to use that bacon grease to saute our mushrooms in. So we'll get these going, and then we'll be back out here with cast iron skillet. Alright, so most all of my pork chops are done. They're hitting right around the 140, 150 range, so they're mostly done. You could probably go ahead and eat them right now. It is recommended to eat at 145 for pork products, but we're going to go ahead and get our cast iron skillet warming up. I did throw a little piece of apple wood underneath there. That's where you can see the flames coming in. Reason I wanted to do that, I wanted a little extra heat source for that cast iron, because it does take it a minute to get that cast iron nice and hot. And we're going to saute some bacon in that pan so we can use the bacon grease to actually do our mushrooms with. We will add some butter and some salt and pepper and garlic on them as well. We'll get the mushrooms and the bacon done up, and then we're just going to chop up the bacon, put it over the top of our pork chops, lay some mushrooms on there, and then some provolone cheese right on top. So let's go ahead and get started with this bacon. I like to save a lot of my scraps from my cooks. This is actually some bacon from when I did some jalapeno poppers wrapped in bacon. If you missed that video, be sure to look down and check my channel out. That video is on my channel, so if you missed that, go ahead and tune in. I do apologize for some of the editing if it's not as smooth. You can see this bacon is nearly done, whereas it was just cooking a minute ago. When you're filming outside, you are getting a lot more challenges than you're used to. So we're going to go ahead and take that bacon off and let that crisp up. And we'll actually chop that up and put it on top of our pork chops. Some of it's a little hot. Alright, so now that we got some nice bacon grease in our pan, we'll go ahead and throw our mushrooms in there and get them started. If you've never used cast iron to cook with, it's really cool to use some technology that's been around for hundreds of years. But every time you cook with it, it actually leaves flavoring behind from whatever you cooked before. I've used this cast iron skillet a couple of times, so it's not really as good and seasoned. If you can find one that maybe your grandparents used, you know, those are the ones you really want to save. So I'm got a little bit more grease in here than I need, so I'm just going to pour a little excess off. We don't want the mushrooms to taste just like bacon. We just want to use that bacon grease to help get us a non-stick coating on this pan. So I'm going to dump a little of this grease off. And if you're going to work with cast iron, invest in some good gloves. It does get hot. This is just some butter I put in a Ziploc bag just to make it a little easier. We're using the same salt we used to season our pork chops, some pink Himalayan sea salt, a little granulated garlic, and some black pepper. And normally I don't use metal when it comes to my cast iron. I use a wooden spoon, but I actually broke mine, so I've got to replace that later on. You really don't want anything that's going to be hard going up against the cast iron and scraping it, because that will take off the seasoning that you're trying to build up. So if you have to use something metal, just be real gingerly with it. The last thing you want to do is build up a seasoning on your skillet and then just scrape it off with metal. You also don't want to wash it in the dishwasher, because that's going to defeat the purpose too. It's just going to take the seasoning off. What I recommend is, after the pan cools down after a little while, take a damp paper towel or a lint-free cloth and just give it a good wipe over. I know that's foreign to some people. My wife was one of those. She said you don't wash it, and they do have products that you can use to clean it with, but I like the old school way, like my grandmother did it. It's worked for hundreds of years, so why go reinventing the wheel? Alright, while those mushrooms are sauteing, I'm just going to be off to the side here chopping up our bacon. You don't want it powdery, but just a little bit more than what you get in the bacon bits size when you get the bacon bits from the store. I think that's going to go great, because it's just going to help add a little flavor and crunch to these when we put the cheese over them. We are going to go ahead and just turn our chops too while they're on the indirect side. The heat is radiating through the grate, so we don't want to have one side get too much heat. We want an even distribution of heat. Especially with the heat coming off of this cast iron, it's like a heat deflector. And I couldn't help myself, some of these did get some nice grill lines on them. Hope that's showing up on camera. Let me tell y'all, those mushrooms are smelling fantastic. If you are allergic to the mushrooms, you can use onions also. I know some people have allergies to certain things, so you can always substitute it out for onions if you want to do that instead of mushrooms. Or maybe you just don't like the taste of mushrooms. Alright, we're going to try to wrap this video up before it gets too dark on us. Now that we've got our mushrooms sauteed in cast iron, we got our bacon that we cooked and chopped up. We're just going to put a little bit of bacon over all the pork chops. My kids want some without mushrooms, so we're going to give those to the kiddos, and we're going to have the other ones. Whew, just enough. Bacon is not a primary ingredient in this recipe. I just needed the grease off of it to grease up my cast iron skillet. So we're going to go ahead and just add some mushrooms. You can pile a pretty good bit up on here because we're going to let that cheese melt over the top of all this, so it gives it a nice little mountain of mushrooms. Almost lost one. Alright, so that should be plenty with mushrooms and plenty without. Now we're just going to come back with our provolone. What I like to do is fold the piece in half. Just rest it on top of those mushrooms. I'm not a big fan of just putting the cheese on the top and letting it melt wherever. I like to fold them in half. With my burgers, I'll actually take and fold them into quarters. That way, when they start melting, they sink down and spread out over the top. Don't want to lose all my cheese onto the grates. Alright, now that we've got all of our pork chops cheesed, mushroomed, and baconed, we're just going to close the lids down. I do have my top vent set to wide open. The bottom vent is set wide open, so we're just going to let that cheese melt. It shouldn't take very long, maybe about 10 to 15 minutes at most. And when we get done with this, we'll have them plated up and ready to eat. And here we are back inside. It did take about 10 minutes for that cheese to melt over the mushrooms. So we're going to plate these up. Please subscribe to the channel, drop any comments or likes, and we will see you next time.